Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program again this evening as we sit down with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi and we discuss various international issues around the world. Prof, once again, thank you for being here this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And good evening or good morning to our contributors, wherever they may be, since we now have a global audience, probably cutting across time frames. So I say good evening to all of them, and I'm quite happy to be here.
Thank you, Prof. Um, so the issues in the United States continue to dominate the press, Prof. Um, First of all, President Trump still hasn't considered the election. Are you surprised by that position?
On one hand, I'm not surprised because he has given enough indications in the past 4 to 5 years that he's not one to accept defeat gracefully. You'll recall that even when he was running against Hillary Clinton, they kept asking him that question: will you concede? And he kept refusing to answer the question. And now, during the very first debate uh, um, with Joe Biden, they repeated the question, and he, he was blunt. If he wins, he will accept, and that the only way he will lose is if the election is stolen, which means there's no way he was going to gracefully accept. But I also must confess that I really didn't know it was going to go this far. And from all indications, that is even prepared to go all the way through the court system and also use some of the hidden, or the less, not hidden, but the arcane provisions in the American Constitution to try to see whether he could throw the election to the House of Representatives, where they, a lot of people don't realize something. Even though the Democrats have a majority in the House of Representatives, but the provision in the Constitution says when an election is thrown into the House of Representatives, each state has only one vote per state, not one vote, one representative. No. So there are only 50 votes since there are 50 states, and they're at liberty to vote according to their conscience or lack of conscience. And right now, the Republicans control 33 states out of the 50 states, and the Democrats control only 17 states. So, in other words, if they then vote straight along party lines, Trump wins 33 votes, Biden wins 17 votes. And all that 150 million voters, when you combine both sides, don't matter. That's one of the arcane provisions in the American Constitution. You will recall I kept saying on this program to you that the so-called Constitution for Democracy was anything but. All those rich, landed white people who who were slave owners and therefore did not want votes for black people, who did not want votes for women, who did not want votes for Native Americans, who did not want votes for even white workers, as long as they were not landed property owners, buried in the American Constitution such anti-democratic provisions, which will ignore as if the election never took place, and they will now vote according to their lack of conscience. That's where Trump is going, and I dare say I never thought he would be headed that far.
Prof, if we look at the likelihood of that scenario you've painted for us there, do you see the possibility of that being a peaceful transition?
This has never happened in the United States before, at least I should even say my lifetime. I understand that twice in 1804, and I believe another time, I'm not sure of the exact time frame, you've had problems with elections in the United States, presidential elections that had gone that far. Now, people are more enlightened. People will feel cheated. I mean, people, right now, 76, I believe, or
76 million.
77 million
Million.
voters are on the side of Biden. Are they going to just roll over? Of course, we liberals have a tendency for weakness in not fighting for our rights. They will say, oh, well, it's in the Constitution. What else can we do? The right wing doesn't have any such qualms. So I really don't know. I really don't know. But it will be a tragedy for the United States, a tragedy for democracy, and a tragedy for the world if that was what will happen. And you see, this is where packing the Supreme Court uh, becomes unfortunate, because you see, people were thinking, oh, he's packing the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court can declare him a winner. No, he was packing the Supreme Court with people who would say the Supreme Court has no role in determining who won an election like this. The Constitution says it is the House of Representatives. Therefore, go there and sort out your matter. That is the literal interpretation of the Constitution. That was where it was headed all along. Whereas a more balanced court would have said, well, that might have been what was written there in 1776. But this is 2020. Let us put 2020 into the bargain. There's no way you could interpret a constitution with such an absorbed ending, by throwing all that vote out, all the electioneering campaign of spreading over 2 years, and then ask for 50 votes in the House of Rep to determine him. But now the right wingers have the majority in the Supreme Court. So I don't know.
Yeah, but Prof, ultimately, some people are going to say, well, it's the Constitution. That's what the Constitution says. And on
Yeah,
the basis of that, well, unfortunately, it goes to Trump if that were to be the case.
yeah. And that's why when you asked me for my reaction a week ago, I said to you, this marks the beginning of the decline of American civilization. This election,
Mm.
not only the fact that 71 or it's almost 72 million now voted for Trump, but that you have a sitting president now with the majority leader in the Senate, Secretary of State backing him, is firing his Secretary of Defense and packing the Defense Ministry with his own supporters. They are refusing to release money to the Biden transition team, which they need. They are risking the American strategic position by refusing to share intelligence briefing with Biden. Thank God that Biden is not a spring chicken. Vice president for 8 years, at one time, chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So he probably has a fair understanding of world politics and where things are based. And we shouldn't forget that there are now heads of state in Europe, in Asia, who are dealing directly with Biden, at least in terms of keeping him abreast of what is happening in their own areas. I mean, this is pathetic.
Prof, I have a
Even
question
Biden,
there.
sorry?
I have a question for you there before you leave that point about this
Mm,
transition. I want you have been involved in going into a government position, and I imagine that there would have been some kind of transition at that point. How important is that transition? Because Biden seems to project a view that, well, it's not really going to stop them. It's not really as critical as that. How important is it?
no, a transition is very, very important. I can understand Biden's presidential posture so that he doesn't heat up the system by saying, well, it's not really that critical. Believe me, it is critical because what a well ordered transition does is that the spokesperson or the representative of the losing side, in this case, Trump, if he had conceded, the message really is not meant for Trump. The message would have been meant for his 72 million voters to say to them, calm it. We've played fair and square. We lost this time. Calm down. Another 4 years will just be round the corner and you will have another opportunity. This has been a fair election, even if I don't believe it is fair, but for the sake of the Republic and for the sake of our democratic values, which you all believe in, calm down and let us ensure that there is a future for the Republic. That's what really the concession does. But when you refuse to concede, you deny the Republic that graciousness which the losing side needs in order to feel not cheated. Right now, Trump is busy heating up the Republic by walking them up. You've been cheated. He doesn't even allow that 72 million people voted for him. He doesn't even allow them to graciously accept the result. On the other hand, he's busy walking them up. And this is a disservice to the Republic. In his own diplomatic way, when Biden was asked that question, how, how do our allies in Europe feel about this? He was measured and calm in his reply. He said, it is embarrassing. That's the understatement of the century. It is embarrassing.
One question for you here, Prof. So far, we've had some of the countries in Europe, France, Germany, United Kingdom, have all reached out to President-elect Biden. But as of the time of coming on air, we still hadn't had anything from France, from Russia, from Russia, from China. And the message they've put out there is let's wait for the completion of the process. The question to you is this. Historically, once the election gets called by some of the media channels, everybody world over generally accepts that that's it, it's been done. There is no longer a route for the losing candidate to make it to the White House. What are your views on that, Prof? At what point exactly should foreign leaders be reaching out to the elect? When the election gets called or when the election gets certified?
No, see, the comments by Russia and China are very condescending. The Americans should regard it as insulting. For almost 200 years, in fact, about 300 years, for about 300 years, whoever gets past that 270, the media had always called it. And everybody had accepted that. That is even how Trump himself came in. The media called the victory for him. So how come this will be different? So that's rather condescending. I mean, it's simply because in the case of Russia, his candidate lost. And in the case of China, they are probably making fun of the United States. You know, the Chinese style of diplomacy, you often have to read tea leaves in a cup to discern exactly what the Chinese are trying to say. And the Chinese believe in this face-saving diplomacy. They probably believe that Trump needs to have his face saved. They don't believe in robbing things in. That therefore it doesn't really matter whether they call Biden or not. But let's not rob Trump's face against the muddy wall on this issue. But if I were an American, I wouldn't regard Russian and Chinese reaction to our elections as a barometer of what is right and what is wrong.
Biden is very well known for his influence when it comes to foreign affairs. That he was part of the Committee on Foreign Affairs in the United States in the Senate. Um, how do you see Biden handling the interplay with some of these nations that are probably delaying to come out and support him? Do you think that that would influence how Biden relates with them if he ultimately wins this election?
No, no. Biden is too sophisticated and is too mature to, and in any case, he's surrounded by um, extremely experienced and solid advisors and experts in foreign policy. I don't. It will make a difference. American interests are much solid than for him to do that. And in any case, it's not like Trump. It's not childish in foreign affairs. He's won. He's been declared, president-elect. Whether you are the first to congratulate him, even in England, Boris Johnson's first congratulatory message was a bit wishy-washy, but he since then made up for it
Mhm.
in the Commons by his, laudatory statement, uh, emphasizing the solidity of the relationship between Britain
The
and the
United Kingdom
United
and
States.
the US. Okay. Prof, there's one point you started to talk about it, but I cut you off there. And I want to go back to that point. And this is the fact that um, the election takes place in November. We've got space between November and middle of December when the Electoral College will meet to do what they need to do. And then to Inauguration Day when power eventually transfers. Given some of the things that President Trump is starting to do, uh, for example, you mentioned the firing of the Chief of Defense Staff, the instructions to um, the body that handles transition for the United States government, telling them not to release funds and things like that. Do you think it's about time for the United States to start to look at that period and start to consider changes to limit the powers of the president to make significant changes?
Well, first of all, one correction. Trump didn't fire the chief of defense staff. They don't even have a chief of defense staff. The equivalent is the chairman, joint services. He fired the defense secretary, who is
Thanks for the
like their
correction.
minister of defense. But you've put your finger on on an issue which I think needs to be looked at very closely. You see, provisions of the 1776 Constitution were written at a time when you needed to provide time for people to ride on horseback from maybe wherever they are living to their state capital. That may take weeks to get there. There were no cars. You rode on horseback. Therefore, you needed to give people time. And when they finally got to their state capital, they needed to rest before they would then assemble. You cannot be using that kind of a provision in 2020. The same thing, allowing for 2 months, almost 2 months, November 3rd to January 20. That's a bit over 20 months. No, just around 20 months. You cannot allow that to have a sitting president, whom they now call a lame duck president. You have a lame duck Congress, and both have all the powers of a regular president and a regular Congress. And Trump has just showed you what he's capable of. He's going to end up being a bull in a china shop, wrecking everything, wrecking every institution, posing a danger to the republic because of this roughly 2 months transitional period. Which other country in the world does that? Now, I've had people say to me in conversation, oh, well, but that's democracy for you. I said, excuse me. You can then call anything democratic. Votes don't count anymore because it's not one man, one vote. Is this peculiarity of an electoral college, but you still stretch the meaning of democracy to accommodate that? There will be 2 months of a transitional period when the defeated candidate will still be exercising all the totality of powers. You stretch the meaning of democracy to accommodate that. And you know something. Yes, the media has called it, but there is still an intervening structure, the so-called electors, who then meet to certify the electoral results. Do you know they are not bound by the electoral votes? They are not bound. So let us take Pennsylvania, for example. Yes, because because Biden won the majority of the votes, is being called for him. And the College of Electoral Votes had been allocated to him. When in Pennsylvania, the so-called electors meet, they can decide that they are going to vote for Trump and not for Biden. And don't forget that these electors are then going to go to the floor of the Senate for certification or ratification or whatever it is. And do you know that they are not bound by this the votes that you and I and the whole world has been used to? I remember an episode in 2000 or so, that Gore versus Bush episode. I remember Gore was presiding. That's the constitutional provision in the Senate. And one of the electors coming from a state refused to then vote for Bush and stood up and declared, and Trump, God thanked him, but said not acceptable. So in a way, but you can imagine if it isn't just one elector, if it is a 50 electors who have arranged it among themselves, what will Pence do on that day? Because Pence will preside over the Senate when they meet and the electors come in to vote. You
Prof.
can't have it in 2020. You can't.
Hmm,
And still call it democratic.
hmm. There's one key point here. I think it was 2 days ago, where President Trump was, or at least the Secretary of State Pompeo, notified Congress of what one could refer to as a major arms deal that the government is intending to make to the United Arab Emirates. What is your view on that, Prof? It was a $23 billion deal to sell sophisticated military equipment to the United Arab Emirates.
Trump is within his powers to do so. That's part of the incongruity that I was drawing attention to by having a lame duck president and a lame duck Congress and a lame duck Senate who will still be there with all the powers of a regular president. Trump is right within his powers to do so. He can actually lay landmines in foreign policy and in the economy for an incoming president that will create problems for that incoming president.
Hmm. All right, let's. We might come back to one or two questions I can see on YouTube here regarding the U.S. But let's move to Africa as we discuss the breaking news today of the death of um, one of Ghana's former presidents, Jerry Rawlings. First of all, what do you say to that, Prof? When you had the news?
Well, as you will expect, it upset me quite a lot because even though I'm not really sure whether protocol wise it is allowed for a former foreign minister to claim a former president as his friend. But President Jerry Rawlings was one of those I bonded with uh, as a foreign minister, just as I bonded with Thomas Sankara, who was president of Burkina Faso. I admired Rawlings a lot. He did a lot for Ghana, and I think he did a lot positively for the African image and the African branding. I don't know how many times on this program I have been asked, why do we have docile leaders? Why do we have leaders who do the bidding of their former colonial masters? Why this? Why that? When will we have leaders who will stand up for Africa? Well, Rawlings stood up for Africa through what he did in Ghana. And since he left office, consistently, he has stood up for Africa. And whenever critical issues came up and he was being asked awkward questions by the Western media, he had firmly put them in their place by asking whether they would accept a system that promoted external interest against their own national interest. It's a pity that, something which we Africans don't recognize was that it was younger officers and the rank and file, sergeants, privates in the Ghanaian army who actually carried out a coup and went to liberate Rawlings from prison. He had already been arrested for planning a coup. He had faced a court martial. The court martial he was still on trial before the court martial. So he was locked up in jail, in detention, while the trial will continue. When the rank and file of the army said, no, this is our man. This is somebody who has the interest of Ghana at heart against a rotten system, and liberated him from jail and went to install him as the leader of Ghana. So it wasn't really Rawlings who carried out that specific coup that installed him. And so to that extent, he was beholden to the junior officers and to the rank and file. And that explains some of the things that happened in the first few months of his regime. I had the opportunity to meet him on several occasions after he left office. And we discussed, I asked him questions as regards what really happened during those few months. Because one of the generals in the Ghanaian army that he executed, General Afrifa, was somebody I had a fondness for rather. Of course, I didn't get close to him. I think I was still either a university lecturer or I was Director General of the Institute of International Affairs. But I had a liking for Afrifa, and I asked him, why? What did Afrifa do that you had him executed? Well, he gave his own reasons, which I won't say on this program. So we used to discuss. He even came to Nigeria a few times after he left office, and we were able to talk. And so do you know that it was only a month or so ago that one of the Nigerian newspapers carried the front page headline, Nigeria needs a Rawlings. So you see, in Africa, Rawlings represented what people expect African leaders to be in terms of cleaning out the mess, cleaning out the audience table, or as Trump will say, draining the pond in Washington. They wanted that to happen in their own country rather than the vicious, round the table continuation of corrupt and exploitative leaders who just regard the elections as providing their own turn by turn corruption. Rawlings wasn't like that.
So some credit Rawlings with the opening up of the Ghanaian economy and the opening up of the Ghanaian market. But when we start to look at how the market, the Ghanaian economy grew, at least in terms of GDP, we see that it coincided with about the time that Rawlings left government. Do you subscribe to that notion of crediting Rawlings with it? or did this development begin before Rawlings?
No, what you can credit Rawlings with was cleaning out the system and leaving Ghana with a system that allowed the ruling elite to invest the resources of Ghana in Ghana rather than in their own pockets. So, to that extent, the resources of Ghana contributed to the growth in GDP, even though he was no longer there. And we are referring to the discovery and exploration of gas and oil offshore in Ghana. We have seen, especially in our own country, Nigeria, and in several other countries, where the resources that they made from oil and gas were diverted into private pockets. And the ruling members of the ruling elite became richer as the country became poorer in terms of benefit GDP analysis. That's what the influence of Rawlings prevented in Ghana. There was no growth of an elite that grew fat on the resources of the cocoa and the gas and the petroleum, the crude oil. Ghana did not produce billionaires, while Ghana's growth was just crawling at the pace of snails. No, the GDP had this exponential growth due to the resources. But as I said, one can credit, even though this happened after Rawlings left office, one can give the credit to Rawlings for leaving Ghana with an honest system and a system that was more responsive to the growth of Ghana.
Prof, since you had this sort of relationship with Rawlings, um, how difficult was it for him to govern with the sort of ideas that he brought to the table at the time? Was it, did he have any insecurities when he was doing it? Did he know what the outcome was going to be? And yes, it may come across like this is what he was doing, but internally, was that how he felt?
Yes, he was committed to what he was doing. He didn't mind losing his life if it comes to that. In furtherance of this cause, that's number one. Number two, he had, by executing generals and colonels, by executing judges, some on the Supreme Court, he drove the fear of God into Ghanaians who then were not going to regard the Rawlings regime as business as usual. In other countries in Africa, is generals go, generals come, and they go with their wealth and their loot, which did not encourage people who took over from them to be clean. They then also felt, well, it's our turn to loot, and if we then get overthrown, we'll go away with our loot. In the case of Ghana, by executing those people, he cleaned out the mess and the rot that no one was going to feel he was above retribution if he was caught. If he was caught, with national resources in his pocket. So, to that extent, he put his life on the line. And I remember he was asked this question once on one of these programs. The person tried to imply that Rawlings himself was corrupt. And he said, do you think, having executed generals, having executed judges of the Supreme Court for corruption, I will then soil my hands? And don't forget that the young officers and the rank and file of the army that in fact pushed for the execution of these people were still around. Do you think that they will let me off the hook if what you are saying is correct? So I think that he was aware that he himself was every day on trial if he didn't meet the objectives of the revolution, as it were. So really, Rawlings was not just a coup. Actually, it was a revolution.
Mm. All right, Prof. I want to move the conversation on to some of the news that came out this week regarding a vaccine for COVID-19. Pfizer has declared their vaccine to be 90% effective. Not too long after that, Russia has also declared their vaccine to be 92% effective. How should people take this news?
With, there is nothing as devastating to the human psyche like loss of hope, hopelessness. And this is what we have suffered from. When I say we, I'm talking about the global community, the human race. This is what we have suffered from for a whole year. No light at the end of the tunnel. Confronting this COVID-19 virus, we didn't know where salvation was going to come. And so catching it was almost like a death sentence. And I would not be surprised if more people didn't die from loss of hope than from the actual disease, the actual infection itself. And then comes this news. It's like walking into a dark room and switching off the light. Or, okay, not that far, lighting a candle. You get some reassurance. Now you can see clearly the sun has come out. The rain is gone. There's still flood all around, but you could see the rays of sunshine, and eventually it's going to dry up the floods. And to me, this is the impact of the news last week, or is it this week, of the news coming out about the development of this vaccine. It doesn't matter that they won't start injecting us if it gets clearance until maybe 6 months' time. But it is better than thinking We don't know when salvation will come, and we don't know from where the salvation will come. Now we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we know it is not the light from an oncoming train that is going to run over all of us. On the contrary, it is a light of salvation. I think that it becomes even easier because the effect now of COVID-19 is going to be temporary. I don't want to mislead anybody into thinking the rate of the infection will still not go up, or that people will still not be dying. The rate will continue to go up. People will still continue to die. But you know that 6 months' time or a year's time, we will have conquered this COVID-19. Not in the sense that it will disappear completely. After all, influenza doesn't, it comes every year. But because there are injections, there are vaccines, the rate of fatality in influenza is down. The same thing with measles. The same thing with all these viral infections that are all over the world, whether Lassa fever, whether Ebola, whatever have you. It should not be rampaging the human race. That is my take
Mm.
on the news from Pfizer and the Russians and the Chinese, the Indians. I think there are 19 actually vaccines that are all in the pipeline. And
I
I
want to ask
feel
a
more
question here, Prof.
confident today.
I want to ask you a question here, prompted by a comment here on YouTube saying that Africa needs to look inward for an available cure for COVID 19. At the onset of the pandemic, there was quite a lot of talk at that time that there were some potential cures in Africa, which should be subjected to scrutiny, as one would expect to be the case. But it seems like a lot of those just died down and were left with the bigger companies now continuing with the working on the vaccine. Are you surprised by that?
Um, Let us not confuse two things. Um, Research into the vaccine was one, treatment of the infection was another. And I still maintain, I'm not a doctor, but I still maintain, and the Nigerian Research Institute had confirmed this, that that in Africa, the reason the rate of fatalities in Africa is low is because right from the beginning, if the infection is caught early, the use of this hydrochloroquine, zinc, vitamin C worked. Because when you look at the rate of infection and the rate of fatality in Africa, the rate of fatality was rather low. Now, don't, because I can imagine people saying, yeah, but were you testing enough? This discussion is not about whether we tested enough, but that of those tested and admitted into hospital, the rate of recovery was rather high in Nigeria, in Kenya, because the treatment that was used, at least in Nigeria, was this hydrochloroquine.
Hmm.
And it is still the treatment of choice, even in Nigerian hospitals still today.
So, Prof.
For the development of vaccine,
Okay.
we've never been good about R&D. We've never invested money in research and development in Africa. And this is unfortunate because there are countries, again, like South Africa, like Nigeria, that have enough resources, but no encouragement for the talent. And I would not be surprised if at the end of the day, you find out that there are Africans who are involved in the overseas research institutes that have now developed these vaccines. I
Mm.
will not be surprised.
All right, Prof. We have
Africa,
about
Africa is just hostile, and it's a lack of leadership, a lack of foresight, a lack of vision on the part of the leaders in Africa that we've ignored research and development.
all right, Prof. One last question before we go. We have just about a minute to go, but one last question here, and it's more of an ethical question. It was announced that on the same day that Pfizer announced, or the day after, Pfizer announced the good news about their vaccine, the CEO also happened to sell some shares worth about $5 million. And the question is this: to what degree should healthcare professionals, healthcare organizations benefit financially from the provision of a vaccine in such a time like this?
It's only being human. The people who raise such kind of questions will probably do the same thing if they are in his position. I seldom waste my time um you know focusing on what may appear to be um you're asking a moral question. You're asking people to be more moral than than the human predisposition encourages. So it's lucky.
All right, Prof. Thank you very much again for tonight for answering these questions. And to our viewers that have been online, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, thank you for being here. The program will continue again next week, same time, 7 p.m. in the UK, 8 p.m. in Nigeria, as guide times in the US, depending on where you are. You need to pick the appropriate times. But please share the links with your friends. If you go to the YouTube channel, you would see links to all the previous topics that Prof has addressed, from Ethiopia, the issues in Ethiopia, to Cote d'Ivoire. So many issues going on in the world. Prof has already given us a view on some of these things. But Prof, any last words for our viewers before we go tonight?
Just to thank them for their continuing presence and encouragement with us on this program. The program is more for them, really, and I'm glad that we haven't lost audience. I thank them. They are more important, really.
All right. Thank you very much to our viewers, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.